He shoved me into the dark hallway with one hand, while the other smoothed down his tie. "Go to bed," he hissed through clenched teeth. "My important guests are arriving, and I don't want any eyesores in the living room." I was still holding the kitchen rag. "My name is Carmen. I am 68 years old. And for an entire decade I baked the bread that other people ate." What my son-in-law Roberto never understood, what he never once stopped to consider, is that the key to the pantry and the deed to this house have always been in my pocket. Let me take you back to where it started. 4 in the morning. December. The kind of cold that crawls through window cracks and settles in your bones. At that hour the house belonged to me. It was the only hour it did. I got up from bed with the usual pain in my knees, a dull, faithful ache that has been my companion for years, slid my feet into worn house slippers and tied the wool robe my late husband Arturo had given me on our last Christmas together. Then I walked to my territory. The kitchen was freezing. The fluorescent light blinked twice before illuminating the white tiles. On the center island, pale and enormous, sat a 10-kilogram turkey I had been defrosting since Tuesday. Beside it, a massive pork leg wrapped in plastic waited its turn. 20 people. That was the number Roberto had dropped on me the previous week, as casually as someone asking for a glass of water. 20 people from his company. New business partners. Investors who were going to change his life, according to him. I washed my hands under ice-cold water, feeling my knuckles go numb. I tied on my blue apron, the one with the frayed edges from too many washings, and knotted it at the back. That knot was my battle uniform. I began with the marinade. Whole heads of garlic. Black peppercorns. Bitter oranges squeezed until the acid burned a small cut on my index finger. I blended everything with white wine, apple cider vinegar, cumin, oregano I had dried in the sun myself, and a fistful of coarse salt. The blender motor tore through the silence of the early morning, but I knew nobody upstairs would wake. They sleep the deep sleep of people who know someone else is awake, holding the world together for them. I rubbed the turkey with the marinade, both hands under the cold skin, massaging the meat down to the bone. It is physical, heavy work. My wrists protested with every movement. But I kept going. I thought of Arturo. He used to get up with me at this hour. He would sit in the corner chair with a black coffee and keep me company. He didn't cook, but he would hand me the knives. He told quiet jokes so as not to wake our daughter Valeria. And when the turkey was ready for the oven, he was the one who lifted it with his strong arms. Arturo has been in the ground for 5 years. I have learned to lift the weight alone. With a groan I didn't try to suppress, I hoisted the aluminum roasting pan into the preheated oven. By 6 in the morning, the smell of roasted meat and spices had begun to fill the house. I sat down for the first time, barely 5 minutes, to drink a cinnamon tea and warm my hands around the cup. Outside, the sky was turning a pale, cold blue. There was no time to rest. The pork leg needed its own marinade. Dried chilies, annatto, cloves, pineapple juice. The cycle began again. Cut, blend, rub, roast. At 8, my grandchildren ran downstairs in their pajamas, drawn by the heat and the smell. Leo, 7 years old, threw his arms around my legs. "It smells so good, Grandma." The exhaustion lifted from me for one instant. That is my weakness. My permanent vulnerability. Every burn on my arms, every aching vertebra, I do it for them. I made them breakfast quickly. Scrambled eggs, refried beans, warm tortillas. I sat them at the small kitchen table and watched them eat. I had knitted them red sweaters to wear that night, secretly, in November, working by lamplight after everyone else had gone to sleep. A surprise for Christmas Eve. At 9, Valeria appeared. My daughter came down shuffling her feet, wrapped in a silk robe Roberto had bought her on one of his business trips, a green face mask on, hair wild. She poured herself coffee without looking at me. "How's everything coming, Mama?" "Roberto is really stressed," she said, staring at her cup. "The turkey is almost done. The pork leg goes in soon. I still need to make the desserts, the mashed potatoes, The apple salad and the pasta, I said, drying my hands on my apron. Good. Today is crucial for him. The owners of the construction firm are coming. Everything has to be perfect, Mama. Perfect. The house had always been mine. Arturo and I built it brick by brick. When he died, Roberto suggested they move in to take care of me. That was 3 years ago. Over time, they changed the furniture, painted the walls in cold, gray colors I never chose, moved me to the back bedroom, the narrow one that opens onto the service patio. I accepted it in silence. I accepted it because I am from a generation of women who believe family peace is worth more than personal pride. I believed that by giving way, by serving, I was keeping love alive. At 11 I started on the desserts. The kitchen heat was now suffocating, a brutal contrast to the cold street outside. I made the apple pie crust. Flour and cold butter worked between my fingers until my joints ached. I peeled 3 kilos of apples, sliced them thin, mixed them with cinnamon, brown sugar and a pinch of nutmeg. Then I made the caramel for 2 flan Napolitanos. The boiling sugar jumped from the pot and landed on my right forearm. I pressed my teeth together, hissed, ran cold water over the burn. A red blister rose, throbbing. But I did not stop. The flan had to set in time. At 1 in the afternoon, Roberto made his first appearance. He came into the kitchen in designer athletic wear, talking loudly on his phone, puffing out his chest. He hung up and looked me over, head to foot, without a word of greeting. Carmen, he said. Not Senora. Not mother-in-law. Make sure you're using the exhaust fan. I don't want the house smelling like a cheap diner when the guests arrive. The fan is on, Roberto, but I'm cooking for 20 people. It's normal for it to smell like food. Open the windows. And please hide those old enamel pots. I don't want my partners seeing that kind of thing. Use the glass baking dishes we bought last month. I said nothing. I went and opened the window, letting the cold air slam into my sweating back. I transferred everything to the heavy glass dishes, as he wanted. At 3 I set the dining room table. The dark wood table Arturo had bought with his first important Christmas bonus. I brought out my mother's white linen tablecloth with hand embroidering, the one we reserved for truly special occasions. I pressed it directly with a warm iron, bent over the table until my lower back screamed. Then I polished the silverware piece by piece with bicarbonate and lemon. It had gone dull from disuse. I arranged 20 plates, 20 wine glasses, 20 cloth napkins folded into fans. It took nearly 2 hours to make that dining room look like a luxury restaurant. By 5 in the afternoon, the exhaustion was no longer just physical. It was a heavy fog that blurred my vision. The turkey was golden, perfect, crackling. The pork leg releasing dark, thick juices. The mashed potatoes creamy with exactly the right amount of butter. The pasta, the salads, the dressings, everything ready. Everything built with my 2 hands, my time, the wear of my bones. I went upstairs to my room. The narrow one next to the laundry. I sat on the edge of the single bed and breathed. Every muscle in my body hurt. The burn on my arm throbbed in time with my heartbeat. On the back of the door hung my dress, wine-colored, simple and elegant, washed and ironed with care. My low black heels were ready. I only needed 10 minutes. 10 minutes to shower, wash off the garlic and onion, put on my dress, comb my white hair and walk out to receive Christmas with my family. It was my house. My food. My effort. I wanted at least to be there to welcome the guests. It was 6:30 when I heard the shouting from upstairs. Leo, take off that horrible scratchy sweater. Put on the collared shirt I bought you. Roberto's voice. Sharp and impatient. But Grandma made it for me, the boy whimpered. I don't care. Put on the shirt. I hadn't even showered yet. But I knew that if I didn't go out, Valeria would end up in tears. I stepped into the hallway still wearing my dirty apron. I went to the kitchen to check the oven one last time. At that moment, the front doorbell rang. 7 o'clock exactly. The guests were early. Panic detonated inside the house. I heard Roberto bounding down the stairs, cufflinks being fastened, a blast of expensive cologne flooding the hall. Valeria came after him in a tight black dress and high heels, dragging the children by their hands. Leo was wearing the stiff-collared shirt, his eyes red from crying. My hand-knit red sweater had been forbidden. I stood in the hallway that connects the kitchen to the entrance. I held a dish rag in my hand, still drying my palms. My intention was simple: open the door, say good evening with a smile, then slip back to my room to change quickly. It was my house. My food. The least I deserved was to give the welcome. Roberto stopped dead when he saw me. His eyes moved over me from feet to head with a disgust he did not attempt to hide. He saw my disheveled hair, my forehead bright with sweat, my apron stained with meat juices, the burn on my arm, my house slippers. He saw everything I had sacrificed to give him his perfect dinner, and the only thing he felt was shame. The doorbell rang again. Voices and laughter on the other side of the heavy wooden door. I took one more step toward the entrance. "I'll get it, Roberto, don't war." He pushed me backward with his hand on my shoulder. Hard enough to make me stumble, hard enough that I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling on my damaged knees. "Go to bed," he hissed, teeth clenched so the people outside couldn't hear. "My luxury guests are arriving and I don't want any eyesores in the living room. You've done your part. Now disappear." I went completely still. I turned my head slowly to look at Valeria. My daughter. The girl whose skinned knees I had cleaned. Whose university education I had funded by selling cakes door to door. The woman for whom I had accepted living in the back room like a lodger in my own home. Valeria was standing 2 meters away. She had seen the push. She had heard the words. She looked at the marble floor. She pretended to adjust the collar of Leo's shirt. She made herself deaf. Made herself blind. Her silence was a second push, and it hit harder than Roberto's hand. The doorbell rang for the 3rd time. "You've done your part. Now disappear," Roberto said again, releasing my shoulder and turning his back on me instantly, reshaping his enraged face into a wide, false smile as he walked to the front door. "Don Mauricio. What a pleasure. Come in, come in. Welcome to our home. My wife and I have prepared a spectacular dinner," I heard him say, his voice smooth as oil. Something inside me, something soft and warm that I had kept alive for years purely out of love for my family, dried up completely in that instant. It was a physical sensation, like having a bucket of cold water thrown over glowing coals. All the exhaustion, all the back pain, the throbbing burn, it disappeared. Replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. They had seen me as a servant for so long they had forgotten who owned the house. They forgot that the turkey doesn't roast itself. That the table doesn't set itself. That the magic holding their perfect life together was not born from Roberto's wallet, but from my broken hands. They wanted me invisible, operating the machinery of their polished lives without dirtying the frame. I looked at my stained apron. I looked at the kitchen, where the ovens were still warm and the food sat steaming in its perfect dishes. Then I looked at my room at the end of the hall. Slowly, without making a single sound, I reached behind my back. I untied the knot of the blue apron. Let the fabric fall to the floor with a soft whisper. Dropped the kitchen rag on top of it. I did not say one word. I did not look back at the lit living room where Valeria was collecting the coats of strangers. I walked down the dark corridor with my spine straighter than it had been in 10 years. I entered my narrow room. I did not turn on the light. I closed the door. The click of the latch was clean and final, cutting off the false laughter from the living room like a knife through silk. I sat in the darkness, listening to them begin to serve themselves the feast I had built. They had no idea what they had just created. They didn't know that when this door closed, the engine that powered their entire world had switched off forever. I let the darkness sit for a moment. Then I stood. I turned on the small bedside lamp. The yellow light revealed my refuge, a single bed, a cheap wardrobe Roberto had bought to replace my old dressing table, a cardboard shoebox stacked in the corner. I went to the wardrobe and opened it. There, on a wire hanger, was my wine-colored dress. I ran my fingertips over the fabric. I had bought it with my own savings to wear it that night, to sit at the table surrounded by my family, to be seen. I took it down. I kicked off my worn house slippers. I let the wool robe that smelled of smoke and fried onion and lonely early mornings fall to the bed. I dressed slowly and deliberately. I zipped the back, feeling the fabric settle around my tired body. I sat to buckle my low black heels over my swollen feet. I went to the small mirror behind the door and combed my white hair back with a pair of dark clips. I did not put on makeup, I never liked it, but I pinched both cheeks gently to bring color back into them. I did not look sad. I looked exhausted, yes. Deep shadows under my eyes. But there was something new in my jaw. A hardness that had not been there this morning. I was no longer the frightened widow who surrendered her space. I was someone else. I crouched beside the bed and pulled out the shoebox I kept underneath. Inside was my real life, the one they knew nothing about. My identity card. My bank card where my modest monthly pension arrived. The original house keys. And a manila envelope folded in half. In that envelope were the property deeds. In my name. Free of any mortgage or encumbrance. Roberto had never asked for them directly, but I had watched him for months, dropping hints about regularizing the paperwork, putting the house in Valeria's name. I never handed them over. That envelope was my invisible shield. I also packed Arturo's wristwatch and a silver rosary. I put everything in the small black leather bag he had given me on our anniversary. Durable and discreet. I hung it across my chest. The plan did not form in words. It came in clear, decisive impulses. If they wanted me invisible, I would become invisible. But I would not leave empty-handed. What I had made, I would take with me. I pressed my ear to the bedroom door. The party was in full swing. Jazz music that Roberto always played to seem sophisticated floated at moderate volume. Voices concentrated in the living room and entrance hall. The kitchen and dining room were in the opposite wing. They would be empty. I turned the handle slowly, no sound from the latch, and opened the door barely enough to see. The hallway was dark. Warm light poured from the living room arch at the far end. I came out walking on the tips of my heels to keep them from clicking on the wooden floor. I passed the living room arch without stopping, but caught the scene in my peripheral vision. Roberto stood by the cold fireplace holding a glass of whiskey, smiling with all his teeth at a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit. Valeria sat on the white leather sofa with her legs crossed, laughing that high, hollow laugh she reserved for strangers. My grandchildren were nowhere in sight, sent upstairs most likely, so as not to interrupt the adult conversation. Everything was clean and false, like a magazine cover. I reached the kitchen door and pushed it gently with my shoulder. The warmth inside hit me immediately, the dense residual heat of recently extinguished ovens and the deep smell of roasted spices, seared meat and cinnamon. I turned on only the small hood light, leaving the rest of the kitchen in shadow so no light would leak under the door toward the hallway. I went to the center island. There were the glass dishes Roberto had made me use. One held the pork leg, bathed in its dark, thick juice. The other, enormous and golden, held the 10-kilogram turkey I had massaged, injected and roasted since 4 in the morning. Beside them, covered in foil, were both flan napolitanos, the mashed potatoes and the apple salad. I looked at the food. My food. The pork leg and its garnishes. Roberto had paid for those ingredients. True. But the turkey, that 10-kilo centerpiece, the star of the evening, I had paid for out of my own pocket. I don't have cash on me, mother-in-law. Pay for it and I'll pay you back tomorrow, he had said at the market the week before. Tomorrow never came, as was his custom. The ingredients for the desserts had also come from my own purse, cent by cent, bought at the corner grocery because Valeria had forgotten to add them to her supermarket list. I opened the lower drawers of the pantry. Without thinking twice. I pulled out 3 canvas shopping bags, the sturdy ones I used to carry vegetables from the market. I went to the turkey. I took a large metal spoon and a carving fork. And instead of taking the heavy glass dish that belonged to my son-in-law, I reached up to the high shelf where he had told me to hide it, as if it was something shameful, and pulled down my old blue enamel roasting pan. The one he had called miserable. With a quick, expert movement, I drove the carving fork into the turkey breast and used the spoon as a support from below. It weighed enormously. My wrists shook with the effort, but the fury gave me a strength I had believed lost. I lifted the bird and transferred it from the elegant glass dish to my old pot. The sound of hot meat settling into the aluminum gave me a satisfaction so deep it surprised me. I poured every drop of the roasting juices over the turkey, leaving the glass dish completely empty and greased. I sealed the enamel pot with double layers of foil, pressing the edges tight, and placed it in the first bag. I went for the desserts. Both metal flan molds, cold, perfect, went into the second bag. I found a plastic container with a tight sealing lid in the cabinet and emptied the entire apple salad into it, scraping every last walnut from the edges of the glass bowl. I left the pork leg untouched. The mashed potatoes. The pasta. Roberto had paid for those. He could celebrate his great business deals eating cold pork and pasta. That was his portion. I was finishing knotting the bag handles when a sound froze the blood in my veins. Someone had pushed the kitchen door. I turned slowly, moving the bags behind the center island, resting my hands flat on the cold granite. It was Roberto. He came in quickly, face flushed from alcohol and excitement, holding an empty silver ice bucket. He didn't turn on the main light, just walked toward the refrigerator. When he saw me standing there in the shadow, he stopped. His eyes traveled from my wine-colored dress to my clean shoes to my combed hair. His expression went from surprise to irritation in a single second. "Carmen, what are you doing dressed like that?" he hissed, lowering his voice to a furious whisper, stepping toward me heavily. "Didn't I make it perfectly clear? I don't want you wandering around while we're eating." My pulse beat hard in my throat, but my face showed nothing. I did not step back even 1 centimeter. "I came for a glass of water," I said, in a voice so flat and cold that I barely recognized it as my own. Roberto let out a snort of impatience and slammed the silver ice bucket on the granite bar. Barely half a meter from the empty glass dishes, he still hadn't noticed in the dim light. "Take your water and get back to your room," he ordered, pointing at the door with one accusing finger. "Don Mauricio is enchanted with the house. In 10 minutes I'm bringing everyone to the dining room. Listen to me carefully, Carmen. In 10 minutes I'm coming for the turkey. Fill this ice bucket to the top. Warm up the dinner rolls. And don't come into the hallway for any reason. I'll plate everything myself. I don't want my guests seeing my mother-in-law serving tables." I looked at him. The man sleeping under the roof my husband built. The man eating from my labor. Giving me orders as though I were an intruder in my own sanctuary. "Of course, Roberto," I said, drawing the words out with deliberate slowness. "I'll take care of the ice." He turned and pushed back through the kitchen door, disappearing toward the light and noise of his false world. I was completely alone. The kitchen clock read 8:20. I had exactly 10 minutes before the house of cards came down on him. I did not touch the ice bucket. I did not turn on the oven. I did not take the dinner rolls out of their plastic bag. I picked up the 3 heavy canvas bags by their handles. The turkey in the first bag was brutal weight. It pulled my entire body sideways, straining the muscles of my neck and back. The other 2 bags hung from my left arm. I walked to the back door. The service entrance. The one that opened onto the small cement patio and then to a side alley that connected directly to the main street. The door the delivery men used. The door the invisible people used. It was the perfect exit for me. I slid back the rusted iron bolt with my free hand. Turned the handle. Pushed outward. The cold December night hit my face like a consoling slap. The contrast with the kitchen heat made me exhale a long, slow breath. I stepped out onto the cement patio, my right foot dragging slightly under the weight of the load. I did not lock the door behind me, just pushed it until I heard the metal click of the latch. I walked down the dark alley, guided by nothing but the memory in my feet, navigating by the map I had walked for years. When I reached the sidewalk, the yellow light of the street lamps lit my path. The neighborhood was deserted. Christmas Eve. Every family sealed inside their houses, celebrating, eating, laughing. The silence in the street was total, broken only by the crunch of my own steps on dry leaves and the quiet labor of my own breathing. I did not have a planned destination when I left my room. But as I walked the cracked pavement of my neighborhood, my feet carried me on their own toward the only place I knew the doors would be open. The parish church of San Judas Tadeo. 5 blocks from my house. The place where Arturo and I had married. Where we had baptized Valeria. Where I spent Thursday afternoons helping in the community dispensary. The walk was physical agony. By the second block, the canvas straps had cut into my palms, strangling the circulation in my fingers until they went numb. I had to stop beside a lamppost, rest the turkey bag on a low garden wall, and massage my hands back to life. The cold was working through the fabric of my wine-colored dress, chilling my skin. But I felt no cold in my soul. With every step away from that house, I felt a thick, heavy shell falling from my chest. I was breathing clean air for the first time in years. I checked Arturo's watch. 8:28. In that exact moment, Roberto was pushing open the kitchen door, rubbing his hands together, ready to carry those elegant glass dishes to the dining room table with his big proud smile. I could picture it with photographic clarity. I could see his arrogant grin freezing the instant he turned on the light. I could see his eyes landing on the empty, grease-smeared dishes. I could hear the deadly silence in that kitchen as he realized. No turkey. No dessert. No apple salad. And most importantly, no mother-in-law to shout at. A small, dry, sharp smile formed at the corner of my lips. I picked up the bags again and kept walking. The stone facade of the church appeared ahead. The heavy wooden doors stood open, releasing warm light into the courtyard. The midnight mass was still hours away, but I knew the parish hall beside it would be busy. The women of the community organized a modest dinner there every year for people in the neighborhood who had nobody. Elderly people who lived alone, the hungry ones who slept in the plaza. I climbed the 3 courtyard steps on trembling legs. The weight of the food had pulled a cold sweat onto my forehead, ruining my combed hair. I did not care. I went through the side passage into the hall. The smell of fruit punch and melted candle wax floated in the warm air. 2 long plastic tables with shiny paper tablecloths. About 15 elderly people sitting with paper cups, talking in low voices. And at the far end, beside a small improvised kitchen, stood Donna Marta Santini. A woman my age, also widowed, with inexhaustible energy and a commanding voice that ran the church choir. She wore a white apron over a thick sweater and was stirring a giant pot of punch with a wooden spoon. When she saw me come in dragging the heavy bags, she dropped the spoon and ran. Holy Mary, Carmen, what are you doing here at this hour? And what are you carrying that's breaking your back? She grabbed the turkey bag immediately, taking the weight from me. The relief in my arms was so sudden I nearly lost my balance. I leaned against the doorframe, breathing deeply, feeling the blood return to my fingers. I brought dinner, Marta, I said, my voice slightly rough from the cold and the effort. Marta frowned, carried the heavy bag to one of the empty tables and began working at the knot. When she opened it and saw the enormous blue enamel pan, and lifted a corner of the foil to let a cloud of golden steam and spice fill the room, her eyes went wide. Carmen, this is a banquet, she murmured, looking up at me. What about your family? Your daughter? You told me Sunday your house was full, that your son-in-law had invited his company bosses. My son-in-law wanted a luxury dinner, Marta, I said, keeping my voice steady, without a single tremor. He forgot that luxury isn't served on empty plates. And he forgot who owns the kitchen. She didn't need me to explain further. She saw my party dress wrinkled from effort. She saw the black leather bag pressed against my chest, carrying my whole life inside it. And she understood exactly what I had done. A deep, silent smile of solidarity broke across Marta's face. She nodded once, without further questions. Then she turned toward the room and raised her voice. "Everyone, we have a feast tonight. Bring me the carving knives. We're going to serve this turkey." The hall erupted in quiet exclamation and gratitude. I stepped to the table, took out my carving fork, and began to work. Around me the voices rose warm and real, filling the space with something that had been absent from my own dining room for years: genuine joy. As I cut the first thick slice of white, perfect, juicy meat and placed it on Don Anselmo's plate, I heard the church bells marking 9 o'clock. In my house, 5 blocks away, Roberto was standing at a granite bar with empty hands, facing the absolute abyss of his own arrogance. His luxury guests were seated in the dining room about to discover that their host's grand castle was nothing but a hollow shell, held up by the woman he had just expelled into the dark. Nobody here complained about the lack of crystal wine glasses. Nobody looked with disgust at my old blue enamel pot. When the last plate was served, Marta handed me a thermal cup of hot fruit punch and pushed me gently by the shoulder toward a chair in the corner. I sat. The rigid plastic gave slightly under my weight. For the first time in the entire day, I had no urge to stand up and keep working. I took a sip. The warm, sweet liquid moved down my throat and loosened a knot I hadn't realized I'd been holding since 4 in the morning. I thought of Roberto just then, arriving in the kitchen 8 minutes ago in his beautiful suit, flipping on the light, seeing those shining, spotless, utterly empty glass dishes. I thought of the silence that must have fallen over him. And then I thought of what came next: 20 people in the dining room, and not a single plate of food to bring them. The phone in my bag began to vibrate. I pulled it out. Roberto. 8 missed calls. 6 from Valeria. I watched the screen blink with Roberto's name again. I did not answer. I waited until it stopped. Then I pressed the side button and turned it off. The screen went black. I had given that phone back to the silence where it belonged. I slept at Marta's that night, in the guest room, a small space that smelled of lavender and clean sheets, with a hand-knitted blanket on a firm mattress. The quiet in that room was not the tense, poisonous quiet of my back bedroom at home. It was the quiet of peace. In the morning, I went back. Not to cook. Not to clean. To finish what I had started. I entered through the service door, which no one had thought to bolt. The kitchen looked like the aftermath of a storm. The granite island was covered in half-finished glasses, empty wine bottles and sticky dried spills. In the center, like monuments to arrogance, sat the enormous glass dishes, smeared with turkey grease and apple salad residue, completely empty. Someone, most likely Roberto in blind panic, had attempted to bake the dinner rolls himself. They sat half-raw on a tilted baking tray leaning against the sink. Cigarette ash in the butter dish. The trash overflowing with fine linen napkins crumpled and stained. I walked through it without emotion. No fury. No impulse to grab a mop and fix it. Only a cold, deep satisfaction. This was their true capacity for survival. This was what they produced when my hands were not there to correct their errors before anyone noticed. From upstairs came the sound of voices, muffled through the ceiling, but loaded with venom. I told you to control her, Valeria. I told you to keep her locked in her room. Roberto's voice. Hoarse and hysterical. She ruined me. Mauricio blocked my number this morning. Called me a joke. Said I couldn't even pay for proper catering. I ate from her hands and she used it to destroy me. The contract is gone. My partners think I'm finished because I sat them down in front of empty plates. A crash above me. Something heavy hitting the bedroom wall. Call her now. Tell her to come back and clean this mess before my parents arrive at noon. He wanted the invisible machine switched back on. He was incapable of operating his own life. I pushed through the kitchen door into the hallway. The dining room was worse than the kitchen. My mother's white linen tablecloth, which I had ironed with such care, was stained with red wine. Crystal glasses scattered everywhere. Chairs overturned. It looked like the scene of a panicked flight. I began walking toward my room. My heels struck the wooden floor, loud and deliberate. I did not bother to walk on tiptoe. The sound carried upstairs. The voices cut off. Heavy, anticipating silence. Then fast footsteps on the marble staircase. I reached my door. Before I could turn the handle, Roberto's voice hit me from behind. Carmen. His eyes were bloodshot, wild from no sleep and contained rage. Behind him, coming down the last stairs, was Valeria. She wore her crumpled silk robe, mascara smeared in dark tracks down her cheeks, eyes swollen. Roberto crossed the distance in 3 heavy strides and stopped a meter from me, inflating his chest in a pathetic attempt to recover an authority he had surrendered the night before. "Where the hell were you?" he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Do you have any idea what you did? Do you have any idea of the humiliation you put me through in front of the most important man in this city?" I looked at him with the same clinical detachment you use to observe an insect on its back. "You asked me not to be in the way, Roberto," I said, in a voice so calm and level it seemed to destabilize him further. "You shouted in front of my daughter that I should disappear, that I'd done my part and should get out. In all the years I've lived here, I have never been so obedient." He clenched his fists. "You stole the food. My food. I paid for those ingredients. You paid for the pork leg and the pasta. What couldn't be served cold in your crystal dishes is your problem, not mine." Valeria stepped forward. Her voice cracked. "Help us fix this, Mama. Roberto's parents are coming at 1. We have nothing. Please." I turned to look at my daughter fully. I took in the cheap mascara, the ruined silk robe, the absolute helplessness of her well-manicured hands. She had spent the night in a house with a fully equipped kitchen and could not produce breakfast for her own children. "You are 35 years old, Valeria," I said. My words cut the cold hallway air like a razor. "You have 2 perfectly healthy hands. Go to the kitchen. Take a pan. Make your children some eggs. And if the house is dirty, pick up a broom. You are old enough to know how it works." Roberto stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. "Don't speak to my wife like that. You give no orders here. You look like a beggar in those borrowed clothes. You're going into that kitchen right now. You'll clean, you'll set the dining room, and you'll cook something for my parents. And if you don't, I swear to God, Carmen, I'll pack your things tomorrow and put you in a home. This is my house, and under my roof things happen the way I say." I did not reach into my bag. I did not show him the deed with the notary's seal. I did not need to debate property law with a man who couldn't sweep his own floor. His punishment was not losing the title. His punishment was having to live in the house without me. "Don't worry about packing my things, Roberto," I said, turning the door handle. "I already did." I opened the door, walked through it, and pulled it shut behind me with every ounce of force I had. The slam shook the window glass throughout the entire house. As I walked down the front path toward the street, I heard something crystal smash against a wall inside, followed by Roberto's desperate shout and Valeria's uncontrolled weeping. The chaos had just begun. The invisible machine had disconnected permanently, and the vacuum it left was large enough to swallow them whole. I walked back to Marta's in the cold Christmas morning air with my spine straight and the black leather bag pressed against my chest like a second heartbeat. Inside it, my identity, my freedom, and the irrefutable proof that the ground Roberto had walked on with such arrogance was mine. The months that followed unfolded with a slow, healing rhythm. I stayed with Marta. We split the apartment expenses and began baking together. Sweet bread, pineapple pastries, vanilla conchas, walnut cookies sold to neighbors and at the Sunday church exit. Cooking stopped being an act of servitude and returned to what it had been when Arturo was alive. An act of love. Of self-sustenance. I heard the news through Don Ernesto, the neighborhood night watchman who missed nothing. The electricity was cut in February. 3 months of unpaid bills. Roberto ran out in his underwear to scream at the workers. They left anyway. 4 days of candles before Valeria had to pawn jewelry for the reconnection. Don Mauricio, the silver-haired guest from Christmas Eve, had systematically closed every door in the construction industry for Roberto. He was let go in January. His company car was repossessed. He was selling insurance by commission from a small sedan. The landscaping died because nobody watered it. Garbage piled up on the sidewalk because Roberto had screamed at the collection crew and they stopped stopping at his address. I cancelled the automatic payment on the electricity account in my name 3 days after Christmas. Then the water. Then the high-speed internet Roberto had demanded for his business calls. If my presence was a burden, then so was my money, and my signature. The final chapter came on a hot afternoon in late August. I was in the parish hall stacking empty trays when I heard heels dragging on the tile hallway. I looked up. Valeria. She stopped in the doorway. It took me several seconds to absorb what I was seeing. No silk dress. No designer shoes. Washed-out jeans. A wrinkled cotton blouse. Her hair, once perfectly colored and straightened, showed 3 fingers of dark roots pulled back in a careless ponytail. Her hands, gripping the strap of a cheap bag, had short unpolished nails with the edges bitten down to anxiety. She looked 10 years older. "Hello, Mama," she whispered. "Hello, Valeria," I said. I did not put down my tray. I did not move toward her. She came 2 steps inside, looked around at the smell of burnt sugar and cinnamon, the same smell I had left in her kitchen every morning before being expelled. "I've been looking for you," she said, swallowing hard. "I went to Marta's apartment several times, but she always said you weren't there or closed the door. I need to talk to you, Mama." She told me everything. Roberto hadn't had steady work in months. The money from his commissions barely covered food. The children had been moved from private school to a public one. The hot water heater had broken and they'd been bathing with cold water from a pot for weeks. 2 months behind on property tax. Credit cards devouring them. I listened to every detail of the ruin they had built together. Then she extended her trembling hand toward me and said the thing she had actually come to say. "We need your signature, Mama. We need you to sign over the property deed or give Roberto a power of attorney. If the house is in his name, he can mortgage it or sell it to pay the debts and start something new. We'll give you a share. I promise things will be different. Roberto understands now. He's so sorry. Please, Mama, for your grandchildren, don't leave us on the street." The same hand that had not moved 1 centimeter to defend me when her husband pushed me into the dark hallway. The same hand belonging to the woman who asked me to muffle my coughing with a pillow so as not to disturb her husband's guests while I lay burning with fever. "No," I said. 1 word. Short, dry and absolute. It fell into the room with the weight of a granite headstone. Valeria blinked. Withdrew her hand slowly. "No, Mama. I'm telling you we're going to lose everything. You have nothing to mortgage because it was never yours." Roberto believed that shouting louder made him the owner. You believed him. But the papers are still in my bag. I'm not signing anything. I won't hand over your father's legacy to save a man who treated me like garbage. So you want to see us on the street? You want your grandchildren sleeping under a bridge? At the end of the month, I'm putting the house on the market. With the money, I'm buying myself a small place. The rest I'll keep for Leo and Mia's university educations when they're old enough. They will never lack for anything. But not 1 cent goes to either of you. She understood in that moment. The submissive mother, the invisible servant who fixed every problem in silence, had died on Christmas Eve. The woman standing before her was not going to step back. Valeria turned, shoulders folded, face broken, and walked out of the parish hall dragging her feet, exactly the way I had walked the night they expelled me from my own kitchen. 3 weeks later, a cheap moving truck carried away the minimalist furniture, the flat screens and Roberto's designer clothes. Don Ernesto told me they left before dawn, heads low, loading bags quickly so the neighbors wouldn't see. They left the keys under the entry mat. I hired a real estate agent. Marta and I cleaned the house together, scrubbed the wine stains from the dining room floor, repaired the garden, touched up the paint. 2 months later I sold it to a large family with 3 dogs who filled the courtyard with noise and life. With the money I did not buy a dark apartment or a backroom in someone else's house. I bought a small single-story home in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of the city. Wide windows that let the morning light in from sunrise. A back patio where I planted rose bushes and pots of fresh mint. Marta moved in with me. We became partners and companions. We converted the large living room into our own bakery workshop, taking orders from local cafes and neighborhood events, working at our own pace, without shouts, without urgency, without anyone telling us to hide our tools. My new kitchen is my real castle. The tiles are a clear blue that glows in the morning light. No heavy glass dishes. No cold granite island. Just pinewood tables, worn rolling pins and shelves full of spice jars I dry in the sun myself. It is a Tuesday afternoon now. The weather outside is cool, announcing winter. I am standing at my stove, stirring a pot. Not just any pot. It is the old blue enamel roasting pan, the same one I used to carry the turkey away that night. The one Roberto called miserable. Inside it, caramel for flan napolitanos bubbles with a thick, sweet sound, releasing steam that smells of vanilla and toasted sugar. My hands move without pain. The white scar on my right forearm, where the caramel burned me that Christmas Eve, has faded almost completely into the lines of my age. I turn off the burner. I carry the pot to the table with a smooth movement. I wipe my hands on my white apron, spotless, without a single stain that isn't mine. I walk to the sunniest corner of my living room, beside the window that opens onto the garden. There, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, sits an armchair, olive green, reclining, with a cushion that knows exactly how to hold my back. It is not Arturo's chair. That one was thrown away years ago by a man who did not understand what it was worth. But I searched 10 different stores until I found one identical to it. I sit down slowly. The cushion receives my weight like an embrace. I stretch out my legs. I close my eyes. I listen to the silence. No urgent phone calls. No heavy footsteps in the hall. No voices demanding perfection. Only a bird singing in the rosebush and the distant sound of cooling caramel in my kitchen. I smile in the quiet. I breathe in deep. And I rest, at last, in my own home.